Welcome to Mimir, the podcast for ambitious entrepreneurs who want to launch and grow a successful business from day one. I'm your host, Maddie Kelly, and each week I sit down with founders who have been there, done that. We dive into the mindset, strategies, and practical tools you need to turn your vision into a reality. So let's get to work. Hey guys, welcome back to Mimir. If you're building something mission-driven, you know the real challenge isn't choosing between purpose and profit. It's learning how to honor both at the same time. We talk about values and purpose like they're complicated strategies. But one of the things that really landed for me in today's conversation is how simple the right decisions become when your mission is real. I've always said on the podcast, who you are as a person leaks into how you build. So the question is, how far and how deep are you willing to take your mission? Today's guest has spent her entire career doing exactly that. Kat Dey is the co-founder and president of Ettitude. Through proprietary innovations like CleanBamboo, Ettitude creates sustainable bedding, bath essentials, apparel, and textiles, offering a clean, plant-based alternative to highly polluting materials like cotton, viscose, silk, and cashmere. Kat's a serial entrepreneur who has spent more than 15 years building, scaling, and selling mission-driven companies. In the episode, Kat translates mission into real operating decisions, from sourcing standards and packaging to performance reviews and customer promises, and why scaling a mission-driven company isn't about being quote-unquote pure, but about making values-aligned choices that also show up in the numbers. We talk through what B Corp certification actually entails and why early founders can use it as a compass long before applying. Kat also opens up about healthy co-founder dynamics and sharing the 3 tactical levers she believes drives hypergrowth. What I love about Kat is that she's honest about trade-offs. She talks about removing plastic packaging even though it was more expensive. She talks about transparency with her team and the reality that you can't make a positive environmental impact if you're not a financially sustainable business. If you're an early stage founder building something with heart and you really want to scale, this conversation is going to give you both clarity and tactics for the road ahead. So keep listening to turn your mission into an operating system, not just a tagline. Oh, and stay tuned until the end to get an exclusive discount to shop at Ettitude. Kat, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks so much for having me. So excited to be here.
Me too. I am excited to dive into your experience, but I would love if you could just start with like a brief overview on how you got to Ettitude and where that all came from.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm a serial entrepreneur. I've been building and founding and scaling mission-driven companies for over 15 years now. It's very exciting. And I'm always drawn to mission-driven businesses to solve problems in everyday life. So I joined Ettitude as co-founder and president about 7 years ago after founding, scaling, and selling another mission-driven company prior to that. And I just fell in love with the sheets when Phoebe sent me the product that she had developed and started to build a brand around. And I fell in love with the product and decided to join as my next life mission. And here I am 7 years later, and we've done so much since then. So I'm happy to share more about that. What I'm very excited about Ettitude is that the business is rooted in sustainability and material innovation. And that's something that really spoke to my heart even back then. And now I continue to be very much vested in the mission, which is
I love what you
so
said
exciting.
about, like, you call it your life mission. And I think there's something so fulfilling about mission-driven businesses. Like, I personally lean in that direction. Like, you know, people who are on the podcast, I always really lean towards choosing entrepreneurs who are very much like mission-driven, because I think there's something obviously fulfilling about that experience, like being on the building end of that. I think it is also super important for entrepreneurs in general to know their why. Like, it's what keeps you going through the hard times and the ups and downs. And I find it to be so, so important. And part of the reason I was super excited to have you on the podcast is to really dive into what it's like to actually build and scale like mission-driven companies. Because I think the way that you think about things is probably much different than a regular business would.
Yeah, I think there are some things that might be unique to mission-driven companies, but in general, it's a regular business. You're ultimately trying to make a profit. It's still a for-profit business as opposed to a nonprofit that only thrives on mission and donations, or maybe they do sales of some products for funding of their initiatives. But we're still ultimately driven by the same business goals.
Hmm.
Plus, the triple bottom line of the impact, which could be various for different mission driven companies. For us, it's sustainability, it's for people and planet.
So you're basically saying it's just having like another KPI.
It's another KPI on top of your business KPIs.
Okay, that makes sense. So, okay, I want to kind of pick your brain a little bit about how you scale these types of companies. Like when you stepped into Ettitude or like when you do any of these new ventures, what are sort of like your first key steps for like, let's say your 90-day plan when you start? Like, what are the most important things that you do to translate mission into operation and like how do you actually get it to be at the next stage?
Yeah. So when I joined Attitude, I think maybe it would have been different versus what I could do now or would do now with a different business if I were to step into it. Um, when I joined Attitude, it was still quite early stage. There was product developed, a small team, but no brand awareness in the U.S. So it was really about understanding in the first, I would say, 30 days is just understanding the current status of the business, who everybody is, and what our metrics are, what is our data, just getting the sources and understanding where the opportunities are, and then coming out with a strategy of go to market and the plan and resources needed to achieve those goals. In our case, we realized we needed additional funding in order to achieve our goals. So that was part of our strategies to go out and raise funding, which we did. And that helped to propel some of our growth forward after that and helped us achieve those targets. But as far as mission and embedding mission into the operating DNA, the first thing that you would do is clarify the why. So aligning on the company's true north. What are the problems that you're solving? For whom and why it matters? I think that was not difficult when I joined Attitude because Attitude, the brand, actually the name stands for eco attitude. So sustainability was always part of the brand DNA from the very founding. So that was not the difficult part. Um, Maybe the next step that we needed to do is to translate that into our operations and what that would look like. And that also is not something you are going to do in 90 days. It's going to take potentially years. And then operationalizing that through various systems, translating values into policies, sourcing standards, customer promises, the messages that you have on your website, the communication, and then the next step would be to embed it into your culture. So, how do you onboard new people, but also how do you inculcate this culture with the existing team? And I think for us, that was something that was extremely helpful, where we actually had everyone in the team participate in a defining of values and our culture at the early stages, which we documented and shared, and we still use today, even years later. And that's something that has really stuck around, these values and what that means and how we operate.
Yeah.
And then
I
finally, it's measuring and iterating on everything that you're doing.
Yeah, and it's so much fun to be like at a startup because it is so much of testing hypotheses and testing what works and then figuring out what doesn't and then pivoting and trying something new and continuing along like the iterative mindset. But I think what I love about what you're saying is that uniquely, I've not really heard this because I think typically like the values for the company come straight from the CEO and it's sort of like dictated. And when you start, like those are the values. And then to hear that you guys had like a really collaborative experience around naming and really setting in stone your guys' company values, I think is really, really fun because then I think that also makes everybody else really into the experience as well, right? Like they want to participate and then they want to embody the values even more than they did before.
Absolutely. And we did this in a series of workshops. It wasn't just, one day, sit down, let's come up with our values. It was really
Mm,
an iterative process that took us about 6 months, and was actually facilitated by our key seed investor, Drumbeat Ventures. And that was one of the values that they brought to the portfolio companies, and they only invest in mission driven companies, is this exercise of coming up with values as well as what we call legends, basically examples of these values coming to life that has already happened, so we
mm,
can see it practically. And I think that was really helpful because then we can share examples of, oh, this team member did XYZ and that really resonated with this value, or that team member did that. How can we do more of that? Um, and now we use these values also in all of our performance evaluations too. How did you, an individual in the team, how did you actually execute on these values? What did you do in your last 6 months?
yeah, and like that I think is the key, right? Like how do you execute on the values? Like they're not just there as a directional pillar, like they are deeply embedded in all of those different areas in which it's going to take you to the next level. Like how do you actually operationalize on your missions and like inject them into every single aspect of the business, which I think is really fascinating.
Yeah. And maybe it will be even helpful to share some of these values that we came up with and some of these legends or examples of what
Yeah.
people did, especially for folks who are starting a new business or thinking about this. They're in early stage, they might be thinking about implementing this. I think a practical example would be helpful.
Yes,
So
please.
the obvious one is sustainability for us. That was always part of our DNA, and that is value number one. So we defined it as we create sustainable comfort for people and planet. And an example of that would be our product manager going super deep on understanding sustainable packaging solutions. So, researching all the available options and then educating the internal team on what is actually considered greenwashing. So, doing that education for the team as well is super important, such as biodegradable plastic packaging is actually not as great as we all think it is. And what are the potential options that could be more sustainable? So that would be an example of somebody like a very obvious example of somebody living the values. Um, a couple of other examples would be innovation. That is one of our key values. And so that happens throughout all operations. Every team member can bring innovation into their work streams. But an obvious legend of that would be Phoebe, who's founder and CEO, spending 4 years in R&D, for example, to work on our signature CleanBamboo fabric, and that kind of drove the beginning and continuation of our company. So that would be an example. But a smaller one would be, looking for a new vendor that can solve certain problems that in our operations. That's a really easy one. The final very important value for us is transparency. And, I would give an example of how we live that for our customers. We have our public impact reports, for example, but also internally, we share financial performance for the whole company at all levels. Every level of contributor can see our financials, and I think that really brings so much more ownership and commitment from the team
Yeah.
because they can see directly the impact of their work.
Yeah, and people are so much more driven when they can actually feel like they're touching the product and like having a direct impact in like the end user experience. And I think that's so cool. But I'm also really glad that you brought up sustainability because it's actually something I wanted to talk to you about because there's so much of the sustainable marketing jargon out in the wild, and like as a consumer how do you know the difference between what's really sustainable versus what's not? And how do you make informed choices nowadays as a consumer? Like, how do you guys, or how would you educate your customers to say, like, this is the difference between what sustainable means versus what it doesn't, or like at least how it means to us in our mission?
Oh, yeah. I mean, today there is a lot of information, but with AI, I think it's getting so much easier to sort through it.
Mm,
I think we are living in the last year and a half, 2 years, it's just become so much easier to cut through the noise and kind of understand what is greenwashing, what isn't. Um, for our customer, though, it's a work in progress. There's so much information out there. Unless they're interested in it, it's on us to educate them. And we do a lot of content writing. So our blog is pretty active. We talk about it. We create content on our social media and other channels, emails, etc. The good thing is it is so much easier to sort through the information at this point. And I think there's going to be a lot more awareness, and it's happening now, about, recycled plastic is ultimately still plastic. It's not really a sustainable solution. And,
yeah.
just 2 to 3 years ago, that was such a big trend. Let's turn everything plastic into recycled plastic and call it green. I think people are starting to see through that a bit now. And it's really just a number of different brands who are doing the education, and it all starts with people inside. Are they committed to doing the best that they can, finding the best solutions?
Yeah. And I think also in commitment to your guys' commitment to being sustainable and mission driven, you guys are also B Corp certified, which is super cool. Can you sort of break down what that means for people listening who don't necessarily know about B Corp? Like, what is the purpose of that? Why do you do it? And then I would love to dig into your guys' journey around how you got certified and what that
Yes.
process looked like.
Yes, absolutely. So B Corp is a certification. It doesn't actually change your actual incorporation. So we're still a C Corp.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't necessarily do anything to your legal structure. Um, the good thing is that it is, a very rigorous process of being certified as a B Corp, meaning that you are adhering to the highest standards, to the highest ethical standards in business. And sustainability is a big component of that, but also people policies and, your vendor and, how you treat your suppliers. That's also very important. And they actually give you a score based on all of these different inputs of your business. And I believe a score of 80 qualifies you for a B Corp certification. And an average business that's out there in the world, not, qualifying for B Corp, would be around a 50.9 score. So you need to be doing better than an average business in
Yeah.
order to get the B Corp certification. We actually applied for the first time 4 years ago and received the B Corp certification, and it gives it for 3 years, and then you reapply again. The reapplication process is still rigorous, but at least you've already collected a lot of the data, and it's much simpler. In our case, we actually improved our score over 20 points. Our current score is 123, which is, I believe, the highest in the bedding category. So really amazing, and we're so proud of it because
Yeah.
even in fairly difficult economic times, we continued to improve on our, sustainability and ethics in general, and all across the board. So that's been amazing to see. But it is an amazing platform for companies to look at themselves. It's almost like a mirror
Mhm.
where you're essentially forced to audit everything from your labor policies, your environmental footprint, your governance. All of those points are given to you, and it's a framework. So you can take a look. As a new business, you don't even know where to start. But
Yeah.
because they give it to you, you're going through the process and implementing these things. Like, we didn't have a number of different policies before we started this B Corp certification. but we created those policies, and that was very helpful because now they're in place years later.
That's such a good idea. I never thought about that. Actually, you're blowing my mind in a couple ways. I didn't know that to be certified that you had to have a score. I thought it was just something that like a status that you applied for and they looked at your business and then decided whether or not like you were essentially worthy of being B Corp certified. But that's so cool that it's a scoring process. I didn't know that. And yeah, I never thought about using it as a framework for anybody who's starting the business to say, like, okay, if you're mission driven, I think what's amazing about B Corp certified companies is that you are held to a higher level of transparency. And that pushes you to sort of like not just talk the talk, but walk it also. And so if you're a mission driven founder, like, what a great way to set yourself up for success later. Because to your point, like, I think B Corp certification is kind of like a if you know thing. I don't actually know how many other consumers like care about that. I personally, anytime see a B Corp certified company, I'm always like, oh, I'm definitely going to buy from them because I know. But when you do know, it really is such a cool thing to see because there are very few things in this world, I think, that are so clearly labeled as like this person is like a trustworthy person who leads with goodness. And to have something like in a business, at least, that is a stamp of that kind of certification, I think is it's exciting to see as a consumer. And so I always find it cool to like talk to companies who've been through that process because I'm just so fascinated by the experience.
Yeah, I think it's helpful. And from a, kind of consumer recognition standpoint, I agree with you. It's a little bit of if you know, you know.
Mhm.
I wish there was more awareness about what the B Corp certification actually means. Because before we started, I literally thought you're changing your corporation status. But you're
Yeah.
so, like S Corp, B Corp, C Corp, like that's what I thought it was, but it's
Yeah.
not at all. It's like the B stands for benefit, benefit for the people, for the planet, etc. Um, there are other certifications. Certainly we have like a number of different other certifications that communicate, sustainability, quality,
Mm,
safety. There are multiple other certifications you could have on your actual product. In beauty, you could have like, cruelty-free leaping bunny, like all of those things.
right.
All those things also communicate some sort of ethical production process. But a B Corp is a lot more high level as far as how you're operating your business in general, not just what your product looks like. Of course, the production of your product is a big component, especially in a sustainability score. In most cases, when you're manufacturing something, that's probably where most of your emissions and most of your like chemical impact comes from, is actually through the production of your product.
Right.
Um, but there are all these other parts of operating your business that are also important. Do you have, good benefits for your employees? That type of thing that
Yeah.
a Leaping Bunny certified would not communicate.
Yeah, and I think that's what's so cool about it is it really is all encompassing for the business. It's not just one element. It's like who are you guys at your core that I think is really what the statement is making, which I think is just incredible. Um, to pivot a little bit though, I kind of want to chat a little bit about you and Phoebe as a duo because I think a lot of early stage founders either are looking for a co-founder or have one. And speaking from experience, like working with a co-founder can be challenging at times. And I would love for you to kind of talk about like how you and Phoebe work together, like how you define lanes, build trust, and like make decisions when you're trying to also scale a company, but at the same time, like maintain a strong foundation between the two of you.
Yeah, that's a great question. So for me, in my entrepreneurial experience, I've always had a co-founder, and I thrive in that kind of situation.
Yeah.
Some people prefer working on their own solo and be a solo founder. That works for other people. So really, I think is a personality preference.
Mm,
For me, I love working with a co-founder that brings complementary skill sets, and it keeps us both accountable to each other, and it keeps us motivated. I think there's so many benefits to having a co-founder. And there's
Totally.
such a thing as too many co-founders. I've also seen companies where there are, four or more co-founders, and it's
Wow.
hard. It makes it
Yeah,
really, it
a
makes
lot of
it really hard. Then you have to worry about, who's really calling the shots and how do you resolve conflict. It's a little bit more difficult the more people you bring in. I think two works really well for me in my experience,
I actually didn't know
especially
that
if the
there were more than two. Like hearing you say that there are actually four, I've never heard that before, so that is crazy.
Yes, yes, I am aware of a company that it was an R&D accelerator that had four, and
Wow.
it worked because there are different responsibilities. You could,
Mm,
especially when you're founding a company, like you have no budget. People could come in as co-founders and work for free for quite a long time until you raise money or you start making revenue. So I could see that happening. And, you need somebody to do marketing, you need somebody to do product, you need someone to do finance.
yeah.
It depends on what you're doing, right? There's somebody to do tech.
Mm,
That could be a co-founder. So it's common or like it happens, but then you have to really figure out, does it make sense or not long term.
yeah.
In my
Do you-
case, I think, with a more common two co-founder partnership, um, it's still important to define who's the CEO. And in my previous company, we were actually co-CEOs and equal equity split. In this case, because Phoebe started the business way before I joined, Phoebe is the CEO and owns more equity than I do, and it's totally fair. And what we ended up with is, something that we negotiated and discussed based on the values and contribution to the
mm,
company. And that's something that can also happen with other companies where they can change their structure over time, depending on how they see it fit. Um, so that's also a fungible thing. You could start with something and then you can change it.
yeah.
Um, and a lot of founders don't realize that's possible. You can
Is it
also,
hard
you,
to change later? Because like, don't
uh,
when you submit to
it
the government
is,
stuff, don't you have to like label that? So then you just have to submit another form?
well, in a C Corp, you can have founder stock and then you can add options. So, as the business changes, you can always add more options.
Oh, okay. Okay. Yeah, it's funny, like when I started with my previous co-founder, it seemed very challenging, like from a first-time business owner. In theory, like we should have just gone through like a legal Zoom or someone to help you actually think through all this stuff. And like applying to the government is very confusing for people who have never done it before. And like all
Applying
the
for what through the government?
applying for like your business license to be like an S corp or a C corp, you have to like submit
Okay.
the forms to government, you know?
Okay. Yeah. Hmm.
And I think for somebody who's never done anything like that, it feels very formal and
Overwhelming.
finalized and like scary because you're like, ooh, it's like going to the government and it's like very set in stone. So I actually didn't know that you could change that later on either.
There's so many ways to change things. I mean, of course, you would want legal to be involved in
Yeah.
setting things up. It might become a bit more complex where it's options, or you create an LLC and you like move options into that, or shares into RSUs into like LLC. Like there are different ways to structure, equity, and it can get a little complex, but it's not set in stone.
Mm. So when you and Phoebe started talking, like, do you think that you'd really like early on defined roles where you're like, this is what I'm going to do and like what skills I bring to the table? And she was like, okay, well, this is what I do. And how important do you think that conversation is as early as possible?
Yeah, it's very important to do it as early as possible. For the person who might have started the company and is bringing somebody in and they want to protect themselves, they could put in some milestones for the new person coming in. They don't get their equity right away. There's a vesting schedule.
Mm.
You could come up with all of those structures that protects the original founder.
So then I think for me too, it's like the more that you work with somebody, you start to learn each other's habits and like maybe you start to get on each other's nerves. And like, how do you have those kinds of conversations around ways of working to foster team member attitude and really like try to work productively together and like because I think it can be hard um, when you really want to do your job and you guys are like starting to challenge each other and stuff like that, and then it can just get awkward. So like, how do you have those open kind of conversations to say like, here's the goal that we're trying to accomplish, and here's how I think we need to work together to make it happen.
Yeah, I think it comes through conversations. Even, we have a small executive team. It all comes down to, meeting together monthly on strategy. We are reviewing our strategy goals and, the projects that are the most important and what are we trying to achieve with the resources that we have, what's going to have the highest ROI. So having conversations is a way to move through conflict, and you could have group conversations, you can have one-on-one conversations, you could talk about how you feel about things, what the potential solutions could be, but definitely have frequent communication. I would say that's the most important thing. The quick the more quickly you can resolve some sort of a question mark or a conflict, the better it is, because you definitely don't want it to fester,
Yeah.
because then bad feelings could get involved, resentment, etc. So you don't want that. You want to address things in a reasonable time frame. Obviously, you want potentially sometimes you need other perspectives. You could bring in a third party moderator. If it comes to
Mhm.
that, you can bring in an executive coach. There are actually early stage founder focused executive coaches you could bring in.
Cool.
Um, yeah, we've actually worked with a few over the course of the past 7 years, and it's been extremely helpful not only to manage your leadership style, or your communication, but your relationship as well. They could help if you have any issues there.
It seems like both of you are very self-aware and truly like want to do what's best for the business. And even just the example of like bringing in an executive coach, like I think a lot of people would shy away from those kinds of experiences because they're uncomfortable confronting their own issues. And I'm curious to know like, how are you like that in your day-to-day life, or do you think like business brings that out of you? Because I think in for me, I love entrepreneurship because I think self-aware people thrive in these kinds of roles. And this is just like a hunch I'm having, but I feel like you're a very self-aware individual, so I'm curious to know if that comes out like in your day-to-day life or if you'd agree with that.
So have you ever heard of like Myers-Briggs
Yes.
or those types of personality tests? Um, Early stage, we actually did a program with Predictive Index, which is similar to Myers-Briggs, but maybe has less brand awareness, so not as many people have heard about it. So they've actually done a workshop for our entire team,
Mm,
where we wanted to understand our whole team and what their preferences are and what their tendencies are. And when you understand the person,
yeah.
you work with them better. You figure out how to motivate them better, how to work
Mhm,
out issues, what motivates them, what is their preferred communication style. That's so helpful to
totally.
be more productive as a team. So we understood each other so much better after doing that type
Mhm,
of exercise. It doesn't need to be a paid program. Like I totally support people doing like the Myers-Briggs or something that's free.
yeah.
Just start there so that you know where you're coming from. And as you work together over multiple years, you get even better at it.
Yeah, it's yeah, I think that's really cool because it does feel like my I get excited about these types of mission driven founders because I think that they are ushering in a new way of thinking about business, a new way of doing business where it's not just about the year over year growth. It's about how do we inspire our employees to be the best versions of themselves? How can we help them grow in their careers? How can we leave this place better than we found it? Can we be more sustainable? How can we improve the lives of those around us? And I think that is really permeated in all areas and ways of working. And it's exciting to me because I think if we can bring more of these kinds of businesses to light and at the forefront, like if we can all follow that pattern, like imagine the type of world that we could be building together, you know?
Yeah, it would be amazing. Yeah, absolutely. And for us, sustainability is not just environmental sustainability. It also means how do we sustain our business? How do
Mm,
we want it to be a going concern, and like, in difficult economic times, or if you're an early stage business, that's like survival is a big part of your goals, right? You want to continue to live or grow. So sustainability for us is also make sure the business is sustainable. Like
hmm.
everything that we're doing needs to ultimately lead to profit, because we can't make an environmental impact if we're out of business. Like
Yeah.
we're not going to be able to make the impact we want on the industry if we're no longer here. And
That,
so,
that's such a good call. And I'm really glad that you brought this up because I think there tends to be a misconception where it's like either you do good and you like don't really make money from that, or like companies that make billions of dollars are inherently bad.
mhm.
And I think what you said is really poignant and important to remember that in order for these types of businesses to do good and to be a proponent of their mission, that business has to exist in order to do so. And it's like we can't make a change without being fueled, and like the founder can't do what they need to do without being able to pay themselves in the same way. And I think it's a really important point to make where it's like you can have both. You can have profit and you can have your mission and fulfill those at the same time.
Yeah, and there's so many great examples of that. There are lots of B Corp businesses. I would say all of those fit the bill. They're all trying to do better, and they're still here, which means that they're making a profit.
Yeah, and I'm curious, like, do your when it comes to like how you work with your shareholders and your investors, are they also, you said like specifically you work with only investors who invest in mission driven businesses. Like, do your guys' KPIs look different than like working with a traditional VC, for example, where they really just care about like the numbers? Or, are you guys scoring differently based on how well you're also fulfilling the mission of the company?
So I wouldn't say we only work with mission-driven or mission-focused investors. I mentioned that our seed investor, Drumbeat Ventures, was only investing in mission-driven companies,
Mm,
but other investors we have don't necessarily have that mandate.
mm,
Many of them do. That it definitely resonated with them. They want to make money as much as any other investor, and
right.
it's great if they can also do it in a way that is positive for the world. I think we all want that.
Mhm.
But I wouldn't say that we're measured in any different way versus a different business. Ultimately, people want to support us because they like the mission. It resonates with them, and they like us as founders as well. That's part of the reason why folks invest in, especially pre-seed or seed, early stage um, rounds. People really do invest based on the founders and the mission, less than the potential numbers that they've already generated. You know,
Okay.
you probably start looking at revenue and EBITDA and all of those KPIs a bit further down the road, Series A, Series B, you know, private equity rounds, that's when it becomes more important.
Mm,
Um, but for us, certainly, it attracted a certain type of investor, and they're very supportive and they're motivated to help us.
yeah, that makes sense. I ask because I'm always curious if at certain points, like you're gonna have to make a tough call on there's always gonna be like a trade-off somewhere. And I wonder if like you'd ever been pushed in one direction and more like a, you know, not necessarily where you've had to go against the values, but where it's like the values are getting challenged in service of like making more money or something like that.
That happens a lot, starting with the cost of our product. The cost of our product is higher than a conventional product, and so that means we have to keep our prices higher than our competitors, which makes it challenging. It's more expensive to acquire customers because
Mm,
now they have to decide whether they want to pay more. And we're constantly struggling with this. So, for example, we used to have plastic packaging, and removing that is more expensive. Replacing it with the non-plastic alternatives, we used a paper alternative. It was more expensive.
mm,
But at the same time, we also see that as a business investment because when we ship product in plastic, our customers are unhappy. They send us emails saying, "What is this? Ettitude cannot ship product in plastic," and we
yeah.
totally agree. So it has a direct impact on our retention. So you
Mm,
can always link your initiatives, your sustainability initiatives, to some sort of business outcome.
mm. That's great advice. I think that's really helpful because I'm sure a lot of founders are going to get to this point where they're having to experience that tension and then be like, okay, well, how do I fix it? And I think what I'm hearing you say is like, there's always a way, and making choices in service of your values is never going to lead you astray.
Absolutely. I think ultimately, consumer nowadays is so discerning and so demanding, and they
Mm,
definitely want to support brands that align with their values,
yeah.
and they can really see through inauthenticity. So it's very important to stay authentic to your values.
And I think also the customers who are emailing you and being like, why are you using plastic, are probably some of like your best champions at the same time because they truly embody everything that you're trying to achieve. And hearing feedback from them is almost like great news because it means that you're going in the right direction. Like people they care and they want what you're offering. And not just that, they want even more from you.
Yeah, exactly. Absolutely.
Okay, well, one last question before I jump, and we go on with the rest of our days. But um, you know, you are like a specialist in scaling mission-driven companies, and I'm curious to know, like, what are, 2 to 3 decisions that you've made that have seen like super hyper growth, um, and changing a company's trajectory versus like right when you started versus after those decisions were made, like what do you think would really be beneficial for an early stage entrepreneur right now to know about taking their business to the next level?
I would say the number one thing to look at for any consumer business or any business that needs to spend marketing dollars on a product is really to understand truly your allowable cost per acquisition. That is
Mhm.
the key number to understand so that you know you're optimizing and you're spending the right amount of marketing dollars to acquire new customers. Because you could underspend. You could be in a situation where you're not getting enough customers and that's not covering your fixed costs.
Yep.
Or you could be overspending, in which case you're not profitable because you're spending more to acquire a customer than the profit that you're able to generate from that customer. So that number is the most important number to figure out. And, especially in a subscription business, which we are not, but, previously I ran a subscription business, that is very key to figure out. What is your retention rate and, how long are they going to stay? How many months or units of products are they actually going to buy from you? So how much can you actually spend to acquire them? And if you get that right, you can definitely scale. So that's number one. Um, I would say there's a number zero, even more important than this number one, which is your product. Did
Mm,
you get the product right? So figure out if it's the most amazing product you could possibly make for the customer. Is there a product
mm,
market fit? Do lots of customer discovery. Understand what do they love about it. Maybe there are some things that are not important that you're investing in.
yeah,
Um, that could also be a problem. You could be spending tons of money on something that they don't care about,
right.
and that makes it too expensive. So figuring out that special fit is very important. And then what else would be very important? Distribution channels.
Mm,
How are you finding your customers? Is it all online? Are you in stores? Who are your retail partners, if you have any? That could really supercharge your growth.
yeah.
Is it, communities? Are you driving it through certain trade groups? That could be a different way to grow as well. Nowadays, just online acquisition is very expensive, so you need to think omni-channel. You need to think,
Yeah.
communities and word of mouth. How do you encourage that more? Um, so distribution is number three.
Yeah, I agree. I think the easy answer for early stage founders is like, oh, we need to be online. And I personally think that that's like a somewhat challenging route because it's so inundated. Whereas I think a lot of other like scrappy founders I talk to really spend a lot of time in person, and trying to think of other ways to grow rather than just like solely relying on online channels. So I totally agree.
Yeah, yeah, it's becoming more expensive, so you got to
Yeah.
be either have a huge amount of budget so you can flood the market,
Mm.
or you have to have multiple avenues.
Cool. Well, thank you so much, Kat. I really appreciate you coming on today and sharing your expertise and your experience with us. It's been amazing, and I have certainly learned a lot.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I really appreciate being here.
That's a wrap on today's episode. Thank you so much for listening. All the links to connect with Kat are in the show notes. And don't forget to shop Ettitude and get 25% off your order with Mimir25. That's MIMIR 25. With the holidays coming up, now is truly the perfect time to get your loved one something luxurious. Or get yourself the gift that keeps on giving. Got productivity goals for the new year? What better way to enhance your sleep than with high quality and sustainable sheets? Got a shitty boyfriend who you're planning on breaking up with? Stay toxic and get him the best sheets ever so every time he goes to sleep, he'll think of you. I'm just kidding. But anyway, if you feel called to support this podcast, please give it your honest rating or leave a review. If you enjoyed this episode and you're looking for more, dive into the Well on Substack, where you'll find more founder wisdom and essays on entrepreneurship. See you guys next week.